It's Gridiron Betting Insights here on QL TV. I'm Jay Sanin. Thank you so much for checking us out on a Tuesday night or whenever you catch the show on demand here on QL TV. Tonight, a lot to get to as we look back at week 2 of the NFL season. A big week for bettors as the public came out on top in many cases. We'll cover that. We'll also talk about what we've learned during week 2 of the NFL season in a segment cleverly named What Have We Learned? We'll also take a look back at my picks, and they were not great in week 2 in a segment called Upon Further Review. We'll also play Trust Me, Don't Trust Me with some key quarterbacks in the NFL heading into week 3. And if you stay tuned to the end of the show, you will get to see my first pick of week 3 of the NFL season. All that coming up here tonight on the GBI show. Of course, the GBI show brought to you by BetQL. Get your gridiron betting insights at BetQL today. Use promo code SANIN, SANIN, at the bottom of your screen for 20% off all subscriptions to their tremendous pool of data. Each game simulated over 10,000 times so they can get you projections on where the game will land relative to spreads, totals, first half, second half, the money line, everything you need to look for when you go to place your bets. You can find it at betql.co. Now let's take a look at what we've learned after 2 weeks of the NFL season, a segment that I so brilliantly have named, What Have We Learned? And the first thing we learned in week 2 was that it's hip to be a square sometimes in the NFL. Not all the time, certainly, but sometimes it pays to be with the public. Favorites last week in the NFL, 14-2 straight up. 14-2 straight up. And of course, you know what that means. All your money line parlays, all your teasers, ton of those cashing in week 2 of the NFL season. A lot of bookmakers saying this is one of the worst weeks we've had in NFL in our history, things like that. I don't put a lot of stock into that because let's be honest, they're trying to make it sound like it's easier than it is to bet on football so that more people come in and do it the next time. But it certainly wasn't a great weekend for the books, however you slice it, because all of those favorites came in winning straight up. A lot of casual bettors, a lot of more inexperienced bettors. They're just betting on teams to win rather than taking the spreads and the totals and things like that. And so, not great from the books perspective, but great from the bettors perspective when 14 out of those 16 games go the way of the favorite. Of course, the two teams that were favored that didn't win, the Philadelphia Eagles, who lost at home outright against the LA Rams. And you also had the New Orleans Saints on Monday Night Football, 4-point favorites. Opened at 6, went down, seemed a little fishy, even got to the point where Saints -4, I heard, was trending on Twitter before the game. And just a heads up, when your bet is trending on Twitter before a game, usually not a good sign because usually it's not the pro bettors that are tweeting their picks in high volume like that. So something to be concerned about once people saw that. They ended up losing outright in Las Vegas to the Las Vegas Raiders in the first game in Allegiant Stadium, which, by the way, I didn't think looked anywhere nearly as cool as that SoFi Stadium out in Los Angeles. But that's besides the point. You also almost had the Kansas City Chiefs losing outright, a tight game. They ended up winning in overtime against Justin Herbert, who we didn't expect to see this week, instead of Tyrod Taylor and those Los Angeles Chargers, and of course the Dallas Cowboys with a miracle comeback of their own. So that's number one. We learned a tip to be a square. Number two, we learned that injuries, we might see a lot of them this year without a preseason, without a lot of time to get these players ready for full contact football activities, because it was, I don't want to say a bloodbath, but it was pretty gruesome out there for NFL teams in week 2. Of course, the big notable injuries coming in the form of players like Saquon Barkley with a knee injury, Nick Bosa's knee, going to knock him out of the season. Cortland Sutton likely to miss the rest of the season as well. Seattle Seahawks linebacker Bruce Irvin, one of the key pieces of that championship defense from many years ago, he's going to miss the rest of the season with a torn ACL. A ton of knee injuries specifically in week 2 of the NFL season. But that wasn't all. You saw Drew Lock with a shoulder injury. He's going to miss, they say, 2 to 6 weeks because of that shoulder. If you're the Broncos and he's your franchise quarterback, you can probably rely on them to wait a little longer instead of rushing him back in there during a season where they've already started 0-2. And you also had Christian McCaffrey suffer an injury where he's set to miss multiple weeks. So not only are you losing a lot of key pieces to individual teams, you're losing a lot of key pieces in terms of players that the NFL fans at large are interested in seeing. And that's certainly no good for the league. It's no good for the fans. But from a betting perspective, it makes things a little tougher in terms of trying to handicap games featuring those teams, because now with nothing to go off of, you have to figure out, okay, who's going to get the bulk of the touches that those offensive players were getting, who's going to get a bulk of the snaps that those defensive players are getting, and how is that going to affect the depth beneath them. Really makes for an interesting week of handicapping coming up, as we have no idea yet as to how these teams are going to fill these sizable voids left by these key players in the coming weeks. And I mean, you think bigger picture here, you got to think the preseason is something that is going to stay. Before the season started, they were talking about, oh, you know what, maybe we'll get rid of the preseason entirely, and not just for this year based on all the COVID stuff going on. After this, you can figure there's got to be a reason to at least get 2 preseason games under each team's belt. Give the key players at least a couple of possessions to remember what it's like to play full speed, full contact football against an opponent that's trying to knock you out, because it has not gone well from a health and wellness perspective for many of these teams. And you hate to see that, because obviously you want to see all the best players, all the key players out there at the same time during meaningful moments as the season goes along. We've also learned, and we talked about this last week, no such thing as a sure thing in this league, right? Well, never was that more apparent than in week 2, when you saw some of these crazy games unfold in the form of the Falcons blowing a huge lead to the Cowboys, the Chiefs nearly losing outright to the Chargers, and of course the Panthers looking like they were going to cover the spread late in that game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And then all of a sudden, after an onside kick with 2 minutes to go, they give up nearly a 50-yard touchdown run to big, bulky Leonard Fournette. And then they have a drive where they could have hit the backdoor cover, stall out on the 5-yard line, when they just kind of chose, we're not even going to go out of bounds. We're just going to let the clock run out with less than 10 seconds to go. No such thing as a sure thing in the NFL. Do not count your money until there are zeros on the clock. This past week fully exemplified why that is an important mentality to have when you bet on the NFL. And tying into that, the last thing we learned in week 2 of the season, please do not lay big money lines in this league. Don't do it. You are putting yourself in a precarious position when you put a ton of money on a big money line in the NFL. We saw that on an in-play wager, most notably on that Falcons-Cowboys game. When the Falcons were up big in the second half, a $35,000 wager was placed on the Falcons money line in play to win just over $1,000. That is, ladies and gentlemen, not a good return on investment, even if it wins. But of course it didn't, and a bettor was out $35,000 as they tried to essentially buy money by throwing all that cash at a huge money line late in that game. And of course, the same can be said about the Chiefs and Chargers. If you put down all that money on the money line with the Chargers, who closed around a 9-point favorite, you were clenching the whole time. There was not one point in that game until that field goal was good and the officials raised their arms to signal that the game-winning field goal in overtime was good, that you felt comfortable at all, because the Chargers defense brought it against the Chiefs in week 2. And Justin Herbert played better than you would have expected for a quarterback, not just making his first start, but making his first start under some undesirable conditions, with Tyrod Taylor scratched late, right before the start of that game. But you're a Chiefs money line better. Yeah, sure, you won, but you were not happy with the way that things played out. Please do not lay big money lines in this league. The market is too sharp in the NFL to get away with doing something just like that. And you can find better value elsewhere where you're putting yourself at less of a risk. That is the key, and that is what we learned in week 2 of the NFL season. Now, in terms of what I learned in week 2 of the NFL season, well, I learned that nothing is forever when it comes to this league. Had a great week 1. Did yours truly, went 4-0-1 on spreads and totals. That's all we'll be playing during this year. We're not going to sit here and lay money lines for you and count it in our win-loss record. But great start. Not a great week 2. 2-4. on spreads and totals in that second week of the season. And as we do in upon further review every week, we will start out with where I was wrong, because I'm assuming you're more interested in that than hearing me pat myself on the back about where I was right. So we'll start out with the 4 picks in terms of where I was wrong. And, well, I was wrong about the Panthers covering 8.5 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I guess I was foolish to think that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers would run in a 50-yard touchdown after an onside kick with about 2 minutes to go, when all they needed was a first down, stay down in bounds, kneel out the clock, we all go home happy. That did not happen. I'm not going to say it was a bad beat, because Tampa Bay did lead by double digits for most of the game, but the backdoor cover was in play, didn't turn out for me, and that's okay. That was our first loss of the week in the early window. Did not hit the over in the Chargers-Chiefs game as I expected to. I expected too much out of Patrick Mahomes against that Chargers pass rush. During our AFC West preview show, I was all about the Los Angeles Chargers with that defense and with a competent quarterback in Tyrod Taylor. Well, it turns out Justin Herbert was competent too, so I wasn't too far off there. But in terms of applying my feelings on these teams to this game, I vastly overvalued what Patrick Mahomes could do against a decent defense in the Chargers. I also think I may have underestimated the Chargers' home field advantage with no crowd. First game in their new stadium, they came out playing some of the most inspired football of any team this week, which is certainly, to their credit, something that I should have seen coming. So that is another area in which I was incorrect. Also wrong about the Eagles as a pick'em against the LA Rams. And hey, got a good number here. I mean, the Eagles started at -4, dipped down to a pick, went back up to about Eagles -2 before kickoff. So you love the number that I got there. But of course, if it doesn't pan out, all the closing line value in the world doesn't mean anything. And I think the area I was most wrong about in this game was the offense of the Philadelphia Eagles. Week 1, they struggled a ton against Chase Young and Kerrigan and that defensive pass rush for the Washington football team. Thought to myself, great, they got Lane Johnson back. That's going to make a difference. Didn't make a big difference. They still had some pressure on Carson Wentz. And even when there wasn't pressure on Carson Wentz, he did not play the level of football that you need a franchise quarterback to play in this league. That interception deep in Rams territory in the second half, when they could have taken the lead with a touchdown, instead they throw a pick, they give up a score, and they never really got close again after that. The defense, porous as well. But when the offense isn't performing, that's less time on the field for the offense, more time on the field for the defense, which means the defense, especially early in the season, when the temperatures are higher, they're going to gas out faster. So things kind of fell apart from there in that game. Big credit to the Rams, though, winning the first game of what's a brutal travel schedule. We'll talk about that later in the show. Also wrong on the Texans +7 against the Ravens. I thought the Texans were in a great spot here. You go 0-1, you lose to the defending Super Bowl champions. No shame in that, really. You come home, you prove, okay, we're still a viable team. We're still a team that can compete for a playoff spot, even against a solid squad like the Ravens. Well, guess what? I was wrong about that, because the Houston Texans no-showed defensively in this game, especially on the ground. 230 yards on the ground for the Baltimore Ravens in this game. The rushing totals will always be a little inflated because you have Lamar Jackson, a running quarterback, who's always able to gain some extra yards on the ground for the team. But 230 yards on the ground for the Ravens against the Texans, there is no excuse for that. That was a pathetic performance by the Houston Texans, and one that I clearly did not see coming. I was right on a couple of games, of course. I was right about the Packers as 6-point favorites against the Lions. The Aaron Rodgers revenge tour still going strong, and I was dead on about the fact that the heartbreaking loss for the Lions last week would have them not come out inspired but deflated instead. That is exactly what happened, and we barely got the under in the Washington football team Arizona Cardinals game. My big key there was the fact that the offense of the football team would be just inept enough to keep us under, and wouldn't you know it, they were indeed just inept enough to keep the total under. Dislike the fact that I was not as bullish on the Dolphins as I could have been. I had said in the preview of that game during Quick Slants, I thought the heat might exhaust the Bills' defense a little bit, given they're not used to that kind of heat. Almost a 90-degree day in South Florida for that game, and I happened to be incorrect on that one, as I did not pull the trigger on the Dolphins, who managed to keep it close against the Bills. But I had rather be wrong about not taking a game than take a game and be wrong about it. Either way, not a great week. 2-4, but 6-4-1 on the season. 60% hit rate thus far, which of course any better would love to have in a league like the NFL. But work to be done. No patting ourselves on the back yet. Of course, we've got week 3 coming up, and plenty of weeks after that where things could go south or they could go well. We'll see what happens, and you can figure it all out with me here on the GBI show as we go along. Of course, in order to make the smartest possible picks, you'll want to use BetQL's NFL betting data. Over 10,000 simulations for each NFL game. And they do a neat thing where they give you a star rating based on their projection of the game and the value that they see based on those relative to the current point spread and total. Neat stuff. You're going to want to check it out. BetQL.co. Use promo code SANIN, SANIN, at the bottom of your screen. Save 20% off of all subscriptions at BetQL. Of course, NBA playoffs coming down to the wire as well. They've got that on the NBA, MLB, anything you need at BetQL. Now we're going to bring back a favorite on the show, and that would be Trust Me, Don't Trust Me, where I, your esteemed host, tell you whether or not I trust certain players in the NFL. And through 2 weeks, I want to focus on the quarterback position because, of course, the quarterback position is the most important position on the field, but there are also a lot of interesting cases in the NFL at the quarterback position. You got some rookies, you've got some guys who are replacing injured quarterbacks now, and you've got some guys who may or may not be living up to expectations. So let's get right into this. Trust me, don't trust me. We are going to start with a quarterback that I've been a little hard on so far. I also just said hard on. We're going to forget that ever happened. That I've been a little unkind to thus far, Joe Burrow. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? I don't trust Joe Burrow. Let me tell you why. Joe Burrow was the number 1 pick in the last NFL draft to the Cincinnati Bengals, a team that's obviously not very good. Otherwise, they wouldn't have the top pick in the draft. Well, Joe Burrow has gone out, and he hasn't played great football. Cincinnati Bengals are dead last in the NFL in yards per play, 4.2 yards a play, and Burrow's 5.2 yards per pass attempt, also dead last in a league that features quarterbacks like Daniel Jones, and now Jeff Driscoll, and Drew Lock, and Sam Darnold, and a lot of quarterbacks who haven't been good. He's the worst of them so far. And I've been seeing and hearing and reading a lot of defenses of Burrow in spite of those numbers. That, oh, it's the offensive line's fault, it's the talent around him. And I have a few numbers that kind of refute that claim. And it's kind of been bothering me as far as the lengths to which people are going to defend Joe Burrow thus far. So we'll start with the claim that the offensive line is the reason that Joe Burrow struggled the way that he has. Well, Joe Burrow, he's been sacked 6 times this season. He's 9 quarterbacks in the league have been sacked 6 or more times. He's one of them. But like Lamar Jackson's one of them. Carson Wentz is one of them. There are some decent quarterbacks who have been sacked 6 or more times so far this year. But the big thing when it comes to the offensive line is he getting time to throw, and is he getting time to let routes develop downfield? Those are the big questions when it comes to a rookie quarterback, more so than just the sack numbers. And the evidence points to, yes, he has had more time than people are saying. So far this season, he has had the same amount of time to throw as Kyler Murray and Teddy Bridgewater on average, excluding sacks. So if you take the sacks out of the equation, this according to NFL's Next Gen Stats, he has had about 2.7 seconds to throw the football. Murray and Bridgewater, right there, 2.69, a 100th of a second less than Joe Burrow to throw the football. And yet, they are averaging many more yards per attempt. Their completion percentages are better as well. And you can tell me, well, that's because, Joe Burrow's a rookie. Those guys are more experienced. Well, that's very interesting because I looked at Kyler Murray's stats from his first 2 games as a pro. Kyler Murray averaged 6.9 yards per pass attempt in his first 2 games. Nice. Also, one of those games was in Baltimore against the Ravens, a team that won 14 games last year, a game that the Cardinals lost. So even with that, it was a low-scoring game. It's not like they got down 35-0 and Murray was able to air it out all game. It was a low-scoring game. The Cardinals were in that game. Averaged 6.9 yards per attempt during those first two games. The first game was a tie against the Lions. Burrow against two teams that aren't. I mean, he faced the team in the Browns last week. Not overly impressive by any stretch. And then he played Tyrod Taylor and the Chargers. Good defense, but he was at home. Had a chance to win the game at the end. So you can say, they've both played two competitive games. And they both didn't win any of those games. But Kyler Murray, 6.9 yards a pass attempt. Joe Burrow, 5.2. So the rookie argument to me doesn't hold water. And you can say, oh, well, Kyler Murray is mobile. He's able to extend plays and get out of the pocket so he can overcome a bad offensive line better. But yes, but isn't that a limitation that's concerning about Joe Burrow? You're never going to have 5 all-pro offensive linemen. That's not how it works in the NFL, especially when you're a team as devoid of winning culture as the Bengals are. It's just not going to happen. When you're a quarterback in the NFL, a number 1 pick, your job, if you're asked to play right away, is to turn chicken bleep into chicken salad. Kyler Murray did that right away. Joe Burrow, not so much. And I want to talk about him having time to throw downfield because that's an excuse I've seen a lot. Again, NFL Next Gen Stats, if you look at a number called intended air yards, which tells you how far down the field a pass is being thrown to its intended target. Not just on completions, on all attempts, intended air yards. He's right in the middle of the league. He's 12th in the league in intended air yards. 8.6 intended air yards per attempt. Which means a ton of quarterbacks, at least 18 of them, have fewer than that. They've been throwing less far down the field. So he's had time to throw the football down the field. The excuses about Joe Burrow have been something else. And this is not me jumping on the bandwagon after 2 weeks. This is me saying from the beginning, before he was drafted, when he was in college, he had one good year in LSU. For a coordinator that went immediately to the pros, he was overqualified to be an SEC offensive coordinator. That's all you need to know about Joe Brady. He had one good year. Before that, he wasn't good his junior season. Not at all. People overreacted to that one good year. I think they're going to be really disappointed in what they see from Joe Burrow. And so far, the numbers do bear that out. Keep that in mind when you're betting on the Bengals this season against some more explosive offenses where he's going to need to keep up. Because so far, the best he's faced is Baker Mayfield in terms of the head-to-head with a quarterback. I don't trust Joe Burrow. That was a lengthy start to trust me, don't trust me. We're going to shorten them up from here. Just a bit of a numbers dump. It's been weighing on me, this Joe Burrow thing. Anyway, Carson Wentz, I don't trust him either. Only Sam Darnold and the aforementioned Joe Burrow, fewer yards per attempt this season than Carson Wentz is 6 yards per attempt. And I get it. Some offensive line injuries, that's going to hurt, but Lane Johnson's back in the equation now for the Eagles. Carson Wentz is supposed to be a franchise quarterback. He was drafted right up there with Jared Goff in that draft. According to Next Gen Stats, same average time to throw as Kyler Murray and Bridgewater. But he's taken 8 sacks. He holds onto the ball a little longer than most. And 4 picks, tied for first in the league. Which means he's making mistakes even with some time to throw. That's a problem. I don't trust Carson Wentz. Tell you who I do trust, though. We're going to get positive here. Teddy Bridgewater. Completing 72% of his passes so far this season. Carolina top 10 in the league in yards per play. That will take a hit with Christian McCaffrey out, of course. But when it comes to a guy like Bridgewater, doesn't make a ton of mistakes. He's thrown 2 picks this season, but compared to guys like Wentz, not too bad. He's a perfect quarterback for this situation when a guy like McCaffrey goes out. Because he is a guy who can manage the game. He's already been in charge of a lackluster offense in Minnesota with the Vikings. He's a guy who's, you might punt a little bit with McCaffrey out, but you're not going to throw a ton of picks with Teddy Bridgewater. Might not be a ton of touchdowns, but you're not going to throw a ton of picks. And I trust him at least to keep things going on schedule for the Panthers, a team where defense is the problem, not offense. That much is for sure. That offense has moved the ball even though they've lost some games. They've moved the ball. The defense can't stop anybody. And unless you're putting Teddy Bridgewater out there, a linebacker, I trust him to continue being efficient at the quarterback position as the season goes on. And finally, I want to talk Jeff Driscoll. Jeff Driscoll, ladies and gentlemen. Guess what? I trust Jeff Driscoll. Not that he's going to be great, but that he's going to be fine in the interim for the Denver Broncos while everything gets figured out with Drew Lock. Driscoll has attempted only 4 fewer passes than Lock so far this season, has 20 more yards, which is to say neither of them have been great, but with Driscoll, you're not suffering a huge decline the way everybody assumes you do with any backup quarterback. He'll be fine. He won't be great. He won't be terrible. And when it comes to just holding down the fort until the face of your franchise comes back from injury, that's all you can ask for. Jeff Driscoll will be fine for a few weeks until you figure out more what you have with Drew Lock and his shoulder injury. Of course, Driscoll did the same thing in Cincinnati when Andy Dalton was benched time and time again. So he's no stranger to this role either. I think he will do just fine for the next few weeks. And that's trust me, don't trust me. We got 2 and 2. We got 2 trust, 2 don't trust. I'm telling you, I do not trust Joe Burrow at all. I could write a book right now about how much I don't trust Joe Burrow as the quarterback of the Cincinnati Bengals. We'll put a pin in it. We'll come back in 3 years. If the GBI show is still going in 3 years, we'll revisit the Joe Burrow situation. I'll be quiet about it for now. Now, for the moment you've all been waiting for, as I stop complaining about young quarterbacks for a little bit. Week 3, early action. I got an early pick for you again this week. Of course, our early pick last week worked out great, as it was the Packers -6 over the Lions. Maybe that's a sign that I should do more of these. Instead, I have one that I like. We're not going to force more than we like early in the week until we have time to really sit down and do our homework on what we need to pick. But our first pick of the week is going to be the Bills -2.5 over the Los Angeles Rams. A battle, by the way, of 2-0 teams. This is one of the most exciting games on the schedule this week. Of course, you have Mahomes versus Lamar on Monday Night Football. That's always going to take center stage. But this is going to be one of the best games of the week. And it's a game where the Bills have an advantage in their quest to move to 3-0, especially because of the travel situation that the Los Angeles Rams are dealing with. The Rams played in Philadelphia last week, so they had to fly to Philadelphia last weekend, play their game. Because of COVID protocols, they are required to fly back to Los Angeles, something they've confirmed on their team Twitter account that they were flying back to Los Angeles before this week's game against the Bills. Then, this coming weekend, you got to fly back and face Buffalo. Whereas the Niners, they had 2 straight games in MetLife Stadium. They got an exemption. They're staying in West Virginia, not quite as arduous a travel situation. The Rams got no such exemption. They are going from Philly to LA to Buffalo all within the course of a week. And that's not easy for anybody, let alone professional athletes who got to squeeze into 2 airplanes and they have to reacclimate their bodies to the time zones. That's going to be a real factor for the Rams, I believe, heading into this game. Also worth noting, the Bills have been better on both sides of the ball than the Rams so far. Net yards per play, almost a half a yard better per play for the Bills through 2 games. And of course, you look at the competition for both teams, not stellar on either end. The Bills with 2 wins, one over the Jets, one over the Dolphins. And the Rams with wins over the Cowboys and the Eagles, both Eastern Division opponents in those games. None of them have looked overly impressive thus far. In fact, I'd argue the Cowboys look even less impressive after week 2 than they did after they kept it close with the Rams. But the Bills, sneaky good this season. By the way, both of these quarterbacks averaging over 9 yards per attempt, or 9 or better, I should say, as Allen is at 9 and Goff, I believe, at 9.3 yards per attempt. So both of these quarterbacks have lit it up, albeit against substandard competition. This game also a huge opportunity for the Buffalo Bills. The Bills' sole possession of first place, which, as you know, being in a division with the Patriots is rare, but with the Patriots losing in that amazing Sunday night game to Seattle, the Bills have a chance now, if they go to 3-0, to keep sole possession of first place through week 3. And of course, the Patriots, they don't have an easy game. They're at home against the Raiders in week 3. The Raiders showed, hey, we could play a little ball too. Say the Patriots lose that game, you could be looking at a 2-game advantage in the division for the Buffalo Bills. So I expect a Bills team to come fired up, acknowledging the opportunity that they have. No fans to put pressure on them at New Era Field or whatever it's going to be called when they finish that renaming process. And the Rams, off a brutal travel schedule against maybe an overrated schedule in the first 2 weeks, this is a recipe where if you can get the Bills at under a field goal, take it before the weekend, because I do think as the smart money continues to pile up, the Bills will end up favored by 3.5 at least. So that's your early action for week 3. Thank you to everybody for tuning in to the GBI show that's this week. That's Gridiron Betting Insights with me, Jay Sanin. We will see you on Thursday, where we will do our degenerate pregame show for Dolphins Jaguars. These Thursday night games. I mean, you can't give me one good Thursday night game to preview. I guess you did with the Chiefs and Texans, but the Texans look bad now. You can't give me one with 2 good teams. I got to sit here and preview Dolphins, Jaguars in detail. That's fine. We're going to do it, though. We're going to help make you some money. We'll find some props for you as well before that game. And then quick slants, previews of every other game on the schedule in week 3 of the NFL season. Going to be a great week of NFL action. We will see you on Thursday to break it all down. Until then, this is Jay Sanin. Thank you for checking out the GBI show. Good luck on all your bets until Thursday.